Welcome to the Mason Storm DIY audio channel. In this series of videos we're making some hi-fi speakers, and in this video we'll be actually making them. And here I have my coffee and my cut list and the table saw. I already have the fence all set up at the correct distance, measured from the fence to the blade to make sure to have the correct cut length, because the width of the saw blade can take away, so it's important to get this kind of somewhat correct. And maneuvering a giant sheet of MDF can kind of be a bit of a pain. It's quite heavy. It's part of the reason why I prefer working with plywood instead of MDF, but this is what I ended up getting, and just kind of running it through nice and slow. And on the other side I had to set a table up to catch the wood, so it wouldn't just like pick me up on the other side, because it's quite heavy. So just we'll run it through again here, get our next series of pieces. Again, just kind of taking my time, just kind of running it through nice and slow, although the video is sped up so it looks like it's a lot faster. So I'm just kind of chipping away at it. There we go. This will be the last one. I think I did change the length before there. So time to start doing our cuts in the other direction. And as part of this video, I wanted to show different ways of kind of cutting the wood. So I got the skill saw out here, and what you do is you clamp a piece of wood, preferably like a straight edge. I don't know why I was using a 2x4 here. And then you can use that to kind of line up the blade and kind of just run it across. The first time I set it up, I measured it, set it all up, but I had it on the wrong side of the blade so that the motor of the saw was actually hitting it. This is another way to mark out your lines, is to use your first cut to line up for the second. So that's just kind of what I did here. And then again, using the 2x4 as the fence and just kind of running her through. And with a long straight edge and proper placement, you can do all of your cuts with a skill saw. Well, you could do all your cuts with a hand saw if you really wanted to. It's just a matter of finding some way to line up that you can get repeatable, consistent results that are good and straight. This is probably the better way to do it, is to use the table saw here and just kind of moving it around because it wasn't quite aligned to where I wanted it to be. And then using the straight edge, if you line up the straight edge, you can bump the square. You can bump the square up to the blade, and then you get an exact cut, because using the straight edge. It's a good way to kind of line it up. It'd be better if I had a sled, and I would probably build a sled for the table saw down the road, because that'll just make everything a lot easier, because sliding the giant piece of wood across the table saw, it's a lot of force to kind of overcome to keep it nice and square without it kind of drifting, and the slider little edge thing there, it's quite small, so having a full sled would definitely make this a lot easier to hold on and manipulate the wood. But it's just use the tools you have, just take your time. I cut out a lot of measuring, because well, I did that for hours, and so I'm just still trying to leave some of it in there and just measuring both sides of the piece, getting the square out, making sure it's nice and square, measuring 5 times, cutting once, and still getting it wrong. It's just a bit of a process, just kind of chipping away at it. The thing is, I think you got to be able to deal with your mistakes. These pieces here were the ones that I cut with the skill saw, and I didn't really like their alignment, so that's why I'm kind of flipping them around and juggling them, because they weren't. I wanted to have the factory edge against the fence to make sure it was as straight of a cut as possible, because any kind of deviation, it kind of telegraphs, it kind of gets worse. So try to get everything as good as you can. And one of the things that's kind of nice about MDF is that, you know, if you're out a little bit or whatever, I mean, you know, it can bend when you clamp it, and it's easy enough to kind of sand, but just try to get it as good as you can the first time, and you'll save a lot of work down the road. So here we are, I'm laying up my first piece to start gluing, just kind of laying them out kind of rough to kind of get an idea of what I'm looking at. And I'm just going to glue the end on here. So I have one of those nice 90-degree clamps. They work really good for small pieces like this. I'll probably get another one of those. I'll probably actually get quite a few more clamps because just did not have enough for this project, but just kind of worked with what I had. There we go. Nice and tight. Just getting the clamp on the other side. Probably should have the camera in a different spot here, but getting the square there. It's not quite looking as good as I like, so I have to kind of flex it around and jiggle the clamps, let the clamps go, re-clamp, and just making sure that I'm nice and square. And one of the other things that I'm going to show a little bit later is that the wood isn't exactly 3/4 of an inch thick, and that actually threw some stuff off when I was building this. So one of the ways to kind of get, yeah, here we go. Here's a better angle there. You can see my nice little 90-degree clamp, and the square sits in there nice and perfect. And I just got to clean up that glue now. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's important to get the glue because it's a real pain to try to chip it away or sand it away afterwards because it's such a different consistency than the MDF. There was a bit of a time lapse there. That was like 12 hours of gluing, and here we go. I set the two pieces up, and here's what I'm talking about before. Because the wood thickness isn't exactly what I thought it was when I designed my cutout, we see we have a little bit of a gap in here, which is kind of problematic. So one of the ways you get around that is you build the box from one end to the other, and that way all of your overhang or mistake shows up on the same side. But we'll see here in a second. So I'll just glue in the side here. Yeah, it's quite a juggling thing trying to figure out how to get the 90-degree clamp to actually be on the right side, and I left that in because it's well, because I did that every single time I pretty much used the thing, because it's just I don't know, it's kind of funny, a little bit of a pain, but here we go. So I like to do the pre-clamp, so I kind of get it all set up in a position, and then I do my glue. So just running a nice bead down here. You can kind of smush it out if you want, and then glue both sides. That's probably the better way to do it. I'm just doing straight glue here. A lot of the times you'll do glue and screw, so you get it all clamped up or whatever, and then you would screw it on the other side, or use like an air nailer. That would be the other way to do it. An air nailer might even be better, because when you glue and screw it, it leaves marks in the wood. Then you have to get out the wood fill and the or the Bondo. I would usually use Bondo over wood fill because the Bondo shrinks less, and I think it's a lot stronger, so it's less likely to kind of chip away. Whereas, you know, some of the wood fill is kind of a little bit crappy. So I'll just kind of throw in all the clamps we have at it, and then leave her overnight. Just as a bit of a time thing. The pipe clamps are really good. I think I'll get more of those. Those ones that are my vertical ones, those are Bessie clamps, and I've had pretty good luck with them. Haven't had them for that long, but I really am a big fan of the pipe clamps. Here we go. I got my little bottle of water and my rag, just kind of cleaning up that glue there. Oh yeah, there we go. Get her all nice and tight. Get the square out and make sure we are in position. There we go. As always with the square, I mean, check multiple points. Check down the whole thing. Just take your time, make sure it's all square before you leave it overnight. If you live in a warm environment, your glue will dry a lot quicker, but yeah, I was gonna say too, if it's like winter time, you probably want it to be in like a kind of a heated area, so you might even want to glue it inside just so your glue doesn't like freeze or anything, because that's really garbage. There we go, just kind of taking the clamps off here. Next day type of thing. And I like doing the clamp on the table there, because that way it doesn't tip away, it doesn't move around, and stays nice and steady. So now I'll just gotta repeat the same process on the other side. Get my nice 90-degree clamp on there. Test fit our wood. And knock the clamp on the floor. Yeah, the 90-degree clamps, gotta kind of line them up with the wood, because the way that it pushes down is from the outside in, so you can kind of line up the clamp, and then that's kind of something that you kind of push against when you're actually laying it out there. Got my nice glue bead in there. Make sure you don't forget to put the glue bead going vertically up the one side, because I did that and I had to actually pull everything apart after clamping it because I forgot. So there we go. Got my first pipe clamp in there. Just using this little piece of wood here just to kind of line it up. I'm just kind of giving it a little wacky just to make sure it's all nice and flush, because if it's out of flush, well, if you have it square but out of flush, then you kind of got a lot of wood that you gotta sand away, or use my technique, which is a Japanese pole saw, and just kind of depends on the amount of overhang, I guess. But it's more important to have it square than it is flush, but ideally you want to kind of have it both. You want it square and flush, but if your wood's not square, it's quite difficult to make a box out of it, because then you're putting a lot of pressure in on the other side when you're trying to line it up to do the top portion of it. But same with repeatability. Repeatability is very important, probably more important than accuracy, because if it's all the same, then it usually works out. Whereas if everything's all different sizes, and if you have half of it right, then that's not good. Just kind of fighting with the clamps, just trying to get them in here, get them into place. It's always good to have that square handy, because sometimes when you clamp down, you kind of pull it in or out of square, and you get it figured out before you put 4 more clamps on to find out that you got to undo everything, as opposed to just undoing one clamp, kind of giving a little tappy with the piece of wood to get it back in the square, and kind of leveling it up there. I put it on this block here to lift it up, so that way I can clamp from underneath to the top when putting the top piece on. In the second box I made, I actually did the other end first before putting on the top. I think that worked out better. But just lowering the table here, just to kind of get it in the position. But this is the top here where it's over such a large area. Like I think I got 5 or 6 clamps on there, and it's just not enough to make it work. Of course, by that I mean that squeeze clamp doesn't really count. And here's the end, just kind of got that going there. I'm using that piece of wood there to kind of wedge it in a bit more because it kind of outsticks a little bit. But here we are, our final glued box in all its imperfection. I can already see on the camera there on that top edge that I'm gonna have to clean that up. And tool I like to use, especially if MDF, is the Japanese pole saw, because you can get really nice and close and it can make real thin cuts. Yeah, here we go, just kind of sawing away there, just kind of chipping away at it. I have this all sped up quite a bit, but it does go quite fast even in real time compared to a lot of other saws. It's important too when trying to use this technique not to kind of gouge into the material, but the flexibility of the blade and the thinness of the blade allow it to really follow the contour of the main portion, so it works out good that way. Just kind of cleaning that up. You get rid of all the real big high spots, and then you can sand it down to make it all nice and perfect. Probably should add some way of attaching the box to the floor that it wouldn't move around so much. Clamping it to a table or something. And here we go, just got it laying down. I'm sitting on it here and just got my wooden block with sandpaper on it. Probably should have used a coarser grit at the start here, because it took hours upon hours to actually sand this thing, and I think if I would have had a coarser grit, could have used a power sander as well. But with MDF, it's so soft that it's really easy to over sand it, and sanding it by hand is one way to prevent that from kind of happening, because I've used a belt sander on there before and it just destroys everything. So just kind of putting the drivers on here to kind of decide on the placement. The formula for lobing is the speed of sound divided by the frequency, and that'll give you your well, if you do everything in inches, it'll give you how many inches apart the driver should be, but you generally want them nice and close together to avoid lobing, especially between the tweeter and the mid-range. But it is possible to have the woofer too far away, and I've run into that before on other systems, and it can give a little bit of like a distortion or kind of non-desirable effect. Just kind of laying them down here this way, that way I can actually see where they show up on the table there. Just kind of feeling it out, how I want to do it. So let's take those away now, and just using the square here, I'm going to do a mark at the bottom and a mark at the top of the enclosure, and then use the straight edge ruler to draw a straight line between the two, and that way I know I have a straight line, and it'll be parallel to the side, because I'm measuring from the same side on both the top and the bottom, so it'll be a line that way. So even if it's off center, which will actually be an advantage in a speaker, because then you'll have different distances between the left and the right, and that'll remove some of the standing waves, even if it is just like a 1/4 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch off. So then I just kind of lay out the drivers and can kind of trace the top line and the bottom line above and below the driver using the square, and doing that I'll be able to find the center points as far as drilling goes for making the actual holes for the drivers to sit in. A lot of different ways you can make the holes for the speakers. I'm going to be using a hole saw for the tweeter and the mid-range, and then using a router for the woofer. But you can also do it with a handsaw, jigsaw. There's lots of different ways to do it. You know, using a compass, you can draw a circle pretty easily, and it's just a matter of kind of cutting it out. But the hole saw works good because it's a nice machined round surface. And it's just a matter of laying them out and getting our lines in place here. And we'll finally do the woofer as well, and just getting everything kind of just the way we want it. The spacing of your speakers, it should be within the lobing frequency, which you can get by taking the speed of sound divided by the crossover frequency. You know, if you use inches per second or whatever, it'll give you how many inches apart center to center they have to be. Or if you do it in centimeters, as long as you have your units the same, it all kind of works out. And this is my technique for finding centers. It's you draw two 45s, and where they intersect will be the center, and then I transpose that onto the main center line, and then I have my true center. Use that to find the center point on all three of the drivers here. Works out pretty good. So here's my hole saw setup for the tweeter, and I use a hole saw that's the size of the center, and that'll be my cutout one. And then I have another one that's right about the exact edge of the tweeter, and then I'm going to use that to inlay the tweeter. So what I'm going to do is put the one hole saw inside the other, and then I'm going to drill a hole, just a shallow hole, and then use the chisel to kind of chisel it out, and that'll give me the ability to inlay the tweeter so that it's flush with the wood, and that can kind of have an acoustic benefit as far as that goes. Just using my punch here to make sure that my drill goes in the center point. It's always good to use a punch, and it works good on wood. It just kind of soaks right in. So we'll start our drilling process. This can take quite a while, and the general technique is to kind of drill a little bit, pull out, and then drill a little bit, because as far as MDF goes, it just kind of binds up in the blade, and it just kind of heats up, and it can start smoking at some point. But got it kind of where I want it, so then I can use my chisel and kind of chisel it out the outside ring. That way when I finish drilling the hole, it'll kind of sit flush. So there's other ways to do this kind of thing with the router and just kind of routing it out, but on a small round surface like this, the chisel usually works okay. Just take your time, and it should come out fairly good. It's nice and easy. If you're using plywood, you might even go down one ply, and it might even actually be easier, but MDF is kind of sculpturable. Just kind of tweaking it a little bit more there because it just wasn't quite deep enough, and time to take out the center. So drill, then blow the chips away, then drill some more. I've sped this up significantly, but just takes time. And if your drill starts getting really hot, just set it down, go have a coffee, do whatever, and then come back and just keep working on it, because you don't want to cook your drill doing this. But there we go, it fits in pretty much exactly the way we want, so we're perfect. So onto the mid-range, and I actually have a hole saw big enough for the mid-range, and it's just kind of lining it up with the outside shroud there, and that way I know I have one that's the right size, the right cutout size. The cutout can also be found on the data sheet for the driver, but it just so happens that that kind of works out. This one takes a lot longer than the last one because it's increased size. So I'll just chipping away at it. Battery died in both the camera and the drill, so hence the new camera angle, but just chipping away at it. That's going. Kind of a slow process, but it's pretty repeatable and generally works out okay. lot quicker on plywood than it is on MDF because it's much more porous. And over here we have our router, the star of the show. That piece of plastic on the right side of the screen, that's going to be my circle guide, and kind of made that. It screws into the bottom of the router, and then I can make an anchor point, and it kind of acts as the center to kind of pivot around it. And over here I'm just kind of measuring the outside diameter of the woofer because I want to inlay it a little bit, so I'm going to try to route out the outer diameter, then I'm going to route out the more inner diameter, and that will allow it to sit flush with the wood, which is kind of what I'm aiming for. So do that in a second here. And it's important to measure from the outside furthest point of your router bit to where your guide is going to be. Store-bought guides, they're probably a good idea. I might get one down the road, and they are already measured out for all the different distances, and usually have all the different holes, and it's a lot easier to adjust that way. But you can make your own guides, you can make your own tools, and just kind of work with work with what you got. So I'm just going to do a very light scoring pass. I actually did an incredibly light scoring pass, and the camera didn't really pick it up, so I did a little bit of a deeper one here. I just kind of cut it out, but then I'm able to measure that and make sure that I'm actually exactly where I think I am, because there's no sense continuing the cut if it's just going to make it worse. Like, I mean, if I really was off the mark here, I mean, at this point I could fill that into a Bondo, sand it clean, and I would only be wasting an afternoon, but not the enclosure. So just kind of pulling it off to take that measurement here. It's just kind of an on and off type of process, but it's pretty good. Now, as far as doing my second inlay thing here, I got a second router bit that's kind of a little bit wider, and I'm just going to do a pass with that, and that'll give me my outside little round bit, and then I'll switch over to the smaller bit, and then that's how I make my inner cutout. Just kind of do a little bit at a time, and just then lower the blade, and then just keep going. It really shouldn't take too long to do, but this is, again, all sped up because it does take a little bit of time. There we go. That's one of the ways I do it, is I kind of lift up on the whole router, kind of bend the plastic there and drop it down a quarter of an inch, or not a quarter of an inch, like a couple eighths of an eighth of an inch or so, and then keep going around. But I ended up messing it up anyway, so this is one of the processes that I use to kind of fix that. I put a bar across the two, and then screw it in, and then put the center slug back in and kind of line it back up to where it came out. And then I'm able to use the router again using the same center. Now, I think it's a big thing to be able to fix your own mistakes, and it's better to get it right the first time, but being able to roll with the punches, I think, is kind of a crucial skill when it comes to building stuff. And this actually worked out really good, because I was able to center it, because I had the lines. I have the line in the middle one way and the other. Like, I have two different center lines, so even if I used a different piece of wood, I could just retrace the lines, and it would work perfectly, because I have everything all marked out ahead of time. So it's a good idea to draw lots of lines. That way you can use them for lining up stuff later if something does go wrong. And it's no big deal. Another thing to do is to cut all your speaker holes or whatever before assembling the box. And that way, if you really screw them up, you can just get a different piece of wood. But I like to have the visual of the box when I do my layouts. That's part of the reason why I don't do 3D modeling generally, is that I usually don't follow what I plan to do anyway. So I like to kind of lay out my drivers, kind of get a feel for it, and kind of see what works, because I can kind of lay out the drivers on different levels of the, or different spots on the box to kind of see what I think would be aesthetically pleasing. So there we go. Got the router back on there, got the wide bit in, and my shallow cut. Was able to just kind of set the bit on where it was already cut before, so it actually keeps the same depth. That way it's not like kind of crooked or anything, but was able to kind of make it work out in the end, which I think was quite good. Quite the process. And then just taking everything apart and then setting the driver back in and seeing that it works, and then we're left with kind of the front of the box being finished. I was doing something with the mid-range driver. It didn't really work out, so I ended up just kind of squaring out the edges and running a couple guides to inlay them, but I didn't have the camera going, and I thought I did, so that'll show up more when I do the actual painting. This is the back of the driver here, or sorry, back of the box, and just gonna be measuring out the center again, like I did before with the top and the bottom. It's possible to use a square and actually trace from the top, like from the front to the top to the back, and like kind of have everything going that way. That way everything's lined up front to back, but you can't really see the front and the back at the same time, so that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to do it that way. But the traditional centering method works good for me. Just had the speaker cup there just for a visualization to try to get the thing all right. But here we go. Drill our hole for the speaker port, and then I'll drill the hole for the speaker cup. As you can see with that really dark chips there, I was pushing the drill a little bit too hard, and it started to kind of heat up, and that's why it's like that. I made these the port out of cutouts from the hole saw. I'll show that in a second, but it's going to look like that, but on the inside of the enclosure, and I'm also going to round the edges there. And I try to give you a bit of a visual. So the mid-range is going to sit in something like that, and that was also made with the hole saw. And so you could cut one with the hole saw. You could make one hole and get multiple sizes, and then kind of stack up the different pieces, and that's how you get the different parts I had there. There's my hole saw I was using, so I had the 3 hole saws. So the center it's waste, and then the second one was the port, and the third ring that makes the mid-range mini enclosure that I had there. Just kind of a way of separating the mid-range from the woofer inside the enclosure, and it's just, this took a really long time to do, to cut these holes. This is the drill press setup here, and it just took hours to cut all these, because I had, well, for the mid-range I stacked 3 of them together, so that plus the front edge or whatever, they gave me enough depth. But it just, doing it again, I would definitely just make a square panels and just make a box inside a box, and that would be the way to separate it there. And it's really hard to get the chips out, because it's just the MDF. So I take it over to the trash can there, and using the screwdriver to clean out in between the lines, and it just takes a while. And just a matter of pecking away at there. See the center released, and then just a little bit more, and then the next part comes out, and then I glued them all together, and that's where I got my ports and my centers, my mid-range mini enclosures. It's quite the process. There we go, pretty close there. It's just a matter of chipping away at it. Just takes time. And I don't think I would do that again on MDF. Here's what that mid-range mini enclosure little thing looks like. I just glued a piece of wood on the bottom of that as well, and kind of cut it out round, so it's just the rings all stacked. And Here's my process for clamping the the base port. There's no way to get a clamp in there, so I use a threaded rod and a board on the top and bottom and just use the nut to kind of pull everything together. And that usually works out pretty good. I've already sanded the inside of the port and chamfered the edge as well, so it works out pretty good. Just kind of giving you a little bit of my visual on what that clamp looks like now. But there we go. That's the process of making the boxes. And last step, of course, is to kind of clean them off with a little bit of water and a rag. But next will be painting or making the crossover. So whichever one I decide to do next, I'd probably work at both at the same time and do the crossover first. But that's it for now. So have a good day.